Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are discussing Italy. I am pleased to introduce Alessio Postiglione, Director of the Master in Communications from Business School, journalist and former policy advisor to different Italian governments. And Valery Tsepkalo, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in the beginning of 19th and one of the presidential candidates in 2020 in Belarus. Alessio, thank you for agreeing to discuss the elections in Italy. Most of the viewers who watch our broadcast live in Belarus. They know a little about Italy, especially how democracy works in Italy, what role does parliament and the opinion play, how the media works. Let's start with the last elections. What are your general impressions of the last elections in Italy?
Good afternoon and thank you for your invitation. Let's say that in Italy has been facing a sort of anti-establishment movement in recent years, something that happened throughout the world, I'd rather say, from Bolsonaro to Trump, from Marine Le Pen in France to Italy, where in the last elections, Fratelli d'Italia, Brotherhood of Italy, which has always been considered to be a fringe radical right-leaning party, has won the elections. This is nothing new to the Italy landscape because the previous elections were won by the League, another alternative rightist party, and the Five Star Movement, a party founded by a former actor, Beppe Grillo, whose political agenda was mainly based on the idea of recalling politics to a new sovereignty, against the privileges of politicians. Their frame was the people against the establishment, which is probably the main frame that this new anti-establishment party are advocating worldwide. Actually, these elections may be shocking for whom have been attending the Italian politics or have been reading Italian newspapers, because our president of the council, the chief of the executive, was Mario Draghi, former head of director of the European Central Bank. But actually Mario Draghi, which is a well-known figure with a big reputation established all over Europe, was being appointed president of the Council of the Ministers due to a political crisis when actually the Conte's executive did not get its confidence vote by the parliament. And that's why, in order to overcome this political crisis, the President of the Republic appointed Mario Draghi, because in Italy, obviously, the head of the state and the head of the government are two different political figures. But the truth about the Italian sentiment is that the Italian citizens were mainly fed up with mainstream policies. That's why, as soon as they had the chance to vote once again, they voted massively for Giorgia Meloni, leader of this right-leaning party called Fratelli d'Italia, and we'll see what's happening. For the time being, I can tell you that Giorgia Meloni obviously started his career as an anti-establishment politician, but now she's trying to convince the centrist electorate and probably also other political leaders in Europe she's not going to put many European rules into questions or into danger. So I think that every time a populist party or an anti-establishment party gets the power, it soon starts a sort of mutation toward the more centrist politics. We'll see.
Let me comment on one of the ideas that I think is quite interesting. So you believe that the current shift towards populism is a kind of a protest against the existing establishment. But what to say? I think that this movement towards authoritarianism is pretty obvious all over the world. And we can see the examples of Russia and, just the shift, definite and very obvious towards authoritarianism in Turkey, Narendra Modi's India. So in China, the same picture. How you can explain it? Just because in these particular cases, we cannot say that it's a protest against the establishment, because this is the establishment. Well, Trumpian revolution, the so-called Trumpian revolution, it can be called a kind of a protest against traditional political party's dominance. And well, even despite the fact that Trump was from the Republican, he was running for the president from the Republican Party, but he was a kind of a protest against the establishment. But how about other phenomena that we can see again in China, the trend towards authoritarianism? Let me once more repeat it. In Hungary, in India, in Philippines, in Russia, so just in quite a big number of states all over the world.
Yes, authoritarianism, the shift towards authoritarianism is a bit different in comparison with the shift toward populism in general. I think that the world has been faced a dramatic crisis from 2008 onwards. Probably in recent years, we've been witnessing the crisis of globalization. Globalization undoubtedly helped a lot of countries in the global south to become richer, but this actually affected the situation, the economic situation, the middle class worldwide. Branko Milanovic has described this movement as a sort of an elephant, because actually it's true that poorer countries have become richer, but it's also true that the middle class all over the world has become poorer. And what we know for sure is that democracy is not something associated, I don't know, with an Hegelian idea of democracy, with Aristotle, Plato. It's nothing about big ideas of philosophy. Democracies are the values of the middle class. Democracy is feasible when people renounce to polarization and accept centrism, because it's no more a war between communists and fascists, but is a confrontation between moderates, left-leaning and right-leaning, who are recognizing their opponents not as enemies, but as competitors, okay? So democracies, in my humble views, is something associated with the success of liberal democracies and with the success of middle class. Due to this crisis of middle class worldwide associated to the crisis of globalization, actually today we are witnessing a sort of deglobalization movement. In liberal democracies, populist parties have flourished, but also worldwide a sort of sentiment, a positive sentiment towards authoritarianism has become fashionable, en vogue. Why? Because democracy is not meant to be efficient, but fair. So we had faced a lot of problems associated with the efficiency of democracy, and people like the likes of Orban, Erdogan, Putin, and blah, 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 they have started saying that illiberal democracies can be more effective than liberal democracies. That's why I think this fascination towards strong men that could solve problems associated with parliamentarian regimes, this sort of fascination has managed to capture some audiences, specifically in that countries that were suffering the pains of crisis the most. Because at the end of the day, consider this, all over the world, mainstream parties like popular parties, socialist parties have been suffering in the last elections. But in the richer countries, they are still holding the power. For instance, in Germany, we still have Popular Party, we still have as SPD, a socialist party. So this kind of crisis have been hitting the countries in different manners, depending also on specific cultural reasons or economic reasons. But what I think is most interesting in this stage is to emphasize how the claim of illiberal democracies, of being more effective of democracies, because Putin has always emphasized the idea that a liberal democracy, an illiberal democracy could work better, okay, in comparison than, I don't know, a liberal democracy. Okay, this idea that liberal democracies can work better is proved to be completely wrong. The pandemic has demonstrated that China, for instance, has not managed to tackle the pandemic well. Russia has failed of tackling the pandemic well. And also the economic crisis now, it seems that the European Union is overcoming big and old-fashioned problems, like, for instance, the fact that the European Central Bank was not a lender of last resort, but thanks to the adoption of Eurobond, also the European Union has shown the world more efficiency. So that's why I think authoritarianism and populism has gained consensus. They are two of a kind. They are two different trends, because the populist parties are not essentially authoritarian parties, but let me be frank about it. All the populist parties are anti-parliamentarians. All the populist parties, even if they believe in democracy, they support majoritarian democracy, because the very essence of the idea, the establishment, the people against the establishment, is that the people must do whatever they want, because once they get a majority, their idea should be pursued politically. This idea is not about liberal democracies, because liberal democracies is not about the power of majority. It's about the interest of the minorities that must be respected, even if the majorities do not support their ideas. Okay, so majoritarian democracy, which is supported by populist party, is very close to the authoritarian regimes of the people you've just quoted.
Well,
Okay, Alessio.
I would probably agree with. I would ask one more question, because Italy was doing, or has been doing pretty well for the last 50 years. And if you can look at the history of your country, like the contemporary history of your country, we can see that within the last 30 years, how many governments, in fact, have been changed. I didn't have an idea, but when I was following the Italian politics, I was amazed that, sometimes the government changed once in 2 years or something, 1.5 years. And still, the country in general was doing pretty well, because it was probably a consensus on some basic values, that even the change of the government didn't mean the change of the major course of the country development. So how you were able to combine this permanent changes inside the government with the overall success of the economic development? If probably people do not know, but the Italian GDP is about $2 trillion, which is bigger than the GDP of Russia. I think Russian GDP is 1.5 trillion US dollars. So it means that Italy was doing really pretty well. So it definitely contradicts the idea that anti-liberal democracy, if we can say this way is more efficient than liberal democracy and the permanent process of changing the government without changing the general course of development.
Well, you are completely right. Probably the Italian system reflects and unveils the secret of the economic development of Italy, because consider that we are a parliamentary system, and parliamentary systems in general are weaker than presidential ones, undoubtedly, because we have a head of government and a head of state, and a head of government should get the confident vote from the parliament. In Italy, moreover, our parliamentary system is a polarized multi-party system. So when Italy adopted this model, we tried to mold, to shape something that was close to the Westminster system, to the system typical of UK, but actually we created something of our own that was even weaker when it comes to the political power of the leader. But the fact that the leader in Italy is not strong, okay, is not so strong. Consider that when we grade the power of leader, we may have a primus solus, a first leader who commands everything, which is the case of presidential systems. Then we can have a primus super partes, a first one leading his cabinet, and a primus inter pares, a first one inter equals, among equals. And that's actually what our president of the Council of the Ministers is. He has not the power, he or she has not the power to, for instance, remove his ministers, okay? And he must or she must rely on his parliamentary majority. Moreover, since we have also proportional electoral systems, many political parties may have their voice in our political system. And this has proved to be an added value because political leaders never had the chance to please only one or two political groups. Let's say, I don't know, the army, let's say, for instance, the bureaucracy, okay? No. In Italy, since these political parties are there are a plethora of political parties, every leader should please many political groups in Italy. And this has proved to be an added value, a weakness of our political system. The fact that the political system can redistribute the wealth to its vast majority of citizens, and also the smallest political group in the parliament may count when it comes to votes, because our leaders are relying also on the votes of small political groups, since is leading coalition of political parties. Is not the leader. Our president of the council is never a leader of a single political party. He must rely on big coalitions, and this fact actually proves how the very essence of democracy, that is to say, favoring the vast majority of citizens, may not harm the economic development. But I must say, to be frank, that another secret of our political system is that political leaders can change, but the interests of the nation are always the same, and there is a group of mandarins, of bureaucrats, who pursue this interest permanently, independently from who is holding the power at the moment. That's the secret. Political fluidity, but stability when it comes to bureaucracy, and a bureaucracy which is competitive. It is not chosen by politicians, but people, in order to enter our bureaucracy, must win a public concourse, okay? So they are not appointed by the politicians, and the life of bureaucrats and politicians are the lives of bureaucrats and politicians are separate, are two separate powers, actually.
Okay, I have two small questions. How do elections in Italy work in general? Can the society control them in all of steps, and maybe do possibility some falsification during election campaign? And what is the role of the opposition in Italy? What rights do they have?
Well, I'm quite sure that in Italy, the chance of falsificating, of having fake elections is impossible, because since, as I told you before, we have an independent bureaucracy, but moreover, we have also an independent civil society, we have an independent media system. All these powers are counterbalancing the political power of the political groups. That's actually the very essence of democracies, no? Checks and balances, because majoritarian democracies, okay, are not democracies. Democracy is the interest of the people, but when all the other political groups forming a community are respected. This implies that politicians are not are not the lonely leader of the political scene, because, for instance, the judge and the magistrate can control independently what's going on at the elections. The bureaucrats, the mandarines, as I told you before, are have not been selected and appointed by politicians, but they are completely independent. So if they decide to put into question a politician's decision, they will not be fired, because they are independent, okay? And if they are acting wrongly, bureaucrats, judges, the magistrates, are going to judge them. And the magistrature, okay, judge, the legislative, the judiciary power is independent in Italy, because political power cannot even appoint the judges. Judges are completely shielded by both the political interest and the interest of bureaucracy, because also bureaucracy could become a bad counterpower. So in order to have all the power acting properly, each power should counterbalance the other ones. And apart from the institutional system, bureaucracy, the judiciary, and the politicians, we have a civil society who is aware of their rights and of civil liberties. Okay, so groups, opinion groups of free people, it's very important. And last but not least, independent media. And obviously in Italy, as in every other country of the world, not always the media are really independent. But by the way, let's say that the media, also with all the limits that we all know, may exert a sort of monitoring power which is independent toward both the judiciary and the executive power. So all these kinds of balancing powers are the secret of a liberal democracy. And actually, what I've just told you, it's what, for instance, the European Union consider it to be the acquis communautaire, or acquis communautaire, because originally it was a Latin word, but we call it in Francais, okay, in French, acquis communautaire. Acquis communautaire are all these rules of law, the rules of law concerning politics, civil liberties, the judiciary, and so on, that a country to be part of the European Union should comply with. Actually, in Italy, we have this we possess the acquis communautaire, even if, because the Italian democracy was born after the Second World War defeat, when all the anti-fascist parties decided to sign a common agreement in order to prevent other fascist movements to get the power once again.
Dmitry, you had another question. Yeah, you had another question.
My question next. Okay. Okay, we have, as you know, there are no elections in Belarus. No one is recognized by the vote as a president. We are planning to hold elections of the People's Parliament, the National Council. As this is such a big global experiment, we believe that the elected body will be able to play an important role in a process of political transition in Belarus. We have studied the activity of National Council in Italy, which was established in 1945 and working during 1 year. Can you tell us how it was in Italy after the Second World War, the political transition?
Well, in Italy, the political transition was not a peaceful political transition because Italy has been ruled by Mussolini, by the fascist regime. And actually, Italy entered into the Second World War with Germany and was the second largest country defeated by the Allies after the Second World War. But we were lucky enough to experience our own resistance in Italy. The fact that Italians liberated themselves from fascism, thanks obviously to the Allies and also to the role that the former Soviet Union played worldwide, because the Stalingrad battle was was the apex of an important liberation front. Anti-fascist movements got the momentum, and Italians reacquired a sort of reputation that they had lost due to the compromises of the fascist regimes. The anti-fascist movement comprised centrist political groups, the Christian Democrats, the mild socialist, right-leaning political parties that were not fascist at all and that were the opposition to Mussolini, and also the communists that in Italy used to play an important role. Italy was the Western country with the most numerous and most powerful communist party outside the countries of the Warsaw Pact. But also, I must say that our communists were a bit different from the communists in former USSR, because from the 70s onwards, they more or less embraced democracy without compromises. And all these political parties agreed a constitution, agreed to write a covenant dictating the principles, but also the proceedings that a liberal democracy should comply with in order to be a proper democracy. So all these political groups, even if they were very wide in their political spectrum, from the right to the communists, they agreed on these common values and also on these common principles and proceedings, and our constitution was born, and the Italian democracy was born with its specific political system that actually reflected the particular social composition of Italy, because since Italy was a polarized country where we had many political movements, in Italy we don't have two leading political parties, as for instance in UK or in the United States, where it's everything about conservative and progressives. No, we have different shades of conservatism and of progressism. But even if our polarization is very high, the fact that we managed to agree on these common principles and on these common proceedings shielded our democracy, safeguarded our democracy. And I want to emphasize, I want to stress not only principles but also proceedings, because we need good rules in order to pursue values correctly. Okay, if we agree on principles but we don't agree on a good institutional system that can safeguard these principles, also the best principles can become a nightmare. After all, communism was based on good principles, but it ended up in a bad regime. So we don't need only good principles. In order to have democracies works, since democracies are mainly a juridical and institutional framework, we need good legal frames in order to assure that the principles are correctly implemented.
So it's really interesting that you have in your country the consensus on basic values, and it probably one of the reasons why are you able to create coalitions between different political parties and between different political groups. But how stable are these coalitions? And what happens if the coalitions would decay? So just whether you announce new elections or just somehow you can rearrange coalition inside the parliament. So how it's happened? Because, just we do have a lot of opposition group, in fact, inside and outside the country, but it's really difficult in Belarus. And the same problem, as far as I understand, exists in Russia, that we cannot agree on basic principles. We cannot agree on basic values. And this is a big problem because we really believe that the unity around a certain personality can bring to authoritarianism, but the unification of the people around certain principles, is can lead to democracy. So how you are able to find these principles, and just how are you able to create these stable coalitions they can rule the country?
Thank you for your question. Let's point out how the political power is split into the executive and legislative. So when it comes to the premier, to the leader, okay, the leader, the premier, the government may fall because it got a no confidence vote, but the parliament still goes on. So the parliamentary system works in order to favor each parliamentarian, each deputy, each lawmaker, or each political party, and our political system let the parliament free to choose who has to govern. So it's true that we always have different governments, and this may be a bit odd. That actually also in Italy there is a debate on how to get stronger governments. Okay, so also in Italy we are questioning if it's possible to keep our democracy working with its pluralism, which is an important feature, but we want to balance this element also with the possibility of having stronger governments. But by the way, even when each government changes once every 2 years, the parliament is still the same. So the idea of the parliamentary system is that the parliament has the chance to change the government and to fine-tune the government. For instance, in Italy, something which happens very often is the so-called rimpasto. In the rimpasto, the leader of the government, the head of government, is not changing, but maybe some of its ministers are changing, because in doing so, the parliament is fine-tuning its policy, and maybe, I don't know, right-leaning politicians on some specific matters is changed in favor of another politician who is more left-leaning. So that's what I define as a fine-tuning mechanism. But once said that, it's important to say that also in Italy we are investigating new reforms in order to get stronger executives. I think that the most relevant thing that hasn't damaged Italy due to an excessive weakness of its executives, of its governments, are essentially two elements. Bureaucracy, which is very strong, as I already told you, and the fact that there was a translation of sovereignty from the national level to the European level, to the European one. And many decisions actually are today taken at the European level and then implemented at the local one. That's why I think this abrupt change of government has never harmed Italy and its economic development in particular.
But when people go to the polling station to cast a ballot for this or that political parties, do they have in mind that in case this party win, or just at least to get the majority of the support from the people, do they envision that the leader of the party would become a prime minister? What my question is that do they vote only for someone to be in the parliament, or they have in mind somebody who can potentially be a prime minister or a minister?
Thank you for your question. There is a twofold situation, because traditionally, since Italy is a straight parliamentary regime, citizens voted for parties, not for leaders. Okay, parties, big tent parties with their ideologies, with their ideas. People used to cast their vote because they supported Christian Democrats, they supported the socialists, and they voted for the socialists independently from the leader because they voted for the ideas. Everything changed once the Berlin Wall came down. Big ideologies, the so-called grand narratives, have become less fashionable. And we had witnessed a process of leaderization of politics in Italy. That is to say, people who are not voting for a party, but people who are voting for charismatic leaders. Okay? But since our regime is still a parliamentary regime, it's true that during the elections, for instance, in the symbol of Fratelli d'Italia, there was the name of Giorgia Meloni as leader. So the people voting for Fratelli d'Italia voted for Giorgia Meloni. But it is true, unknown the real leader of a parliamentary election. Because actually, it's the parliament after the elections, by weighing all the votes that have been cast, and in this precise moments that the lawmakers decide who can be appointed as prime minister. Take, for instance, the case of Mario Draghi. We are currently led by Mario Draghi, but no one voted for Mario Draghi, because Mario Draghi was chosen by the head of state as a way to overcome a political impasse, where any political leader in Italy had not the power to become a prime minister. And this may happen very often because since governments are coalition governments, this implies that the political parties which win the elections must decide afterward who is going to lead the country. But let's say that when there is a clear majority toward some specific party, like in this case, because Giorgia Meloni largely won the elections, it will be by default, she will be by default indicated as the next prime minister. But she's going to be indicated as prime minister because she has to go to the parliament, get a confident vote, and only afterward she will be appointed by the head of state as prime minister. So even if she had won the elections, we cannot say for sure until the parliament vote for a government. But by the way, let's say that in this case, Giorgia Meloni will be leading the country in 2 weeks, I think.
Dmitry, do you have any questions?
Yes. Is online voting used in Italian elections, and how does the media work? Who finance them, and is there censorship in media?
Sorry, is your question about who is shaping the media? I understood correctly.
Yeah, media, and also a small question: is online voting used in elections, in general elections?
Online voting.
I mean,
Okay, online.
Yeah, online.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like some blockchain technology or some else.
Okay, online voting is not possible in Italy, but there have been a lot of disputes and arguments toward online voting. So I guess that probably in the next 5 years we will be able to vote online also in Italy. There were some, I don't know, problems associated with how to control the vote. But since now all the electronic systems are very reliable, specifically when it comes to vote manipulation, there are no excuses not to implement online voting in Italy as well. Concerning the media, as I told you later, in Italy, media is considered to be free. They are working as a watchdog, as the watchdog of the political power. So we are properly a liberal democracy. If you, for instance, take a look to the figures of OECD and all the international organizations, the Council of Europe, for instance, which examine and evaluate how democracy is working in a country. We are a proper democratic country, but even if we are proper democratic country, we have some problems associated with the freedom of the press. That's mainly due to the fact that a political tycoon like Berlusconi was one of the main publisher and the owner of the main private broadcasting television in Italy. Okay, so also in Italy, we experience problems associated with the freedom of the press and the associated problems associated with conflict of interest of politicians, of actually entrepreneurs who could drive and veer the media toward their political positions. But let's say that something which is very peculiar of a liberal democracy, a typical feature of a liberal democracy is relying not only on the legislative and executive power and the judicial power, but also on independent authority which are in charge of governing some specific markets. Between these authorities in Italy, but in all the European Union, we have an authority specifically dedicated to tackle problems associated with freedom of the press, who finance the media, who finance all the political communication, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, this authority also, for instance, decides the time that must be allocated to each political party during the elections, in order to avoid that a rich tycoon, as Berlusconi did, by governing the country, can decide that all the media should tell stories about its political party, called Forza Italia. This authority has the power to fine televisions and media which do not respect the principle of par condicio. That is to say, assuring equal conditions to all the political parties and all the political leaders during the elections, but also in normal time, not only during the election. So this is actually a way to govern and to tackle this problem associated with big tycoons that might influence the political decisions through the ownership of the media.
And who can fine these media if they violate the principles of independent media?
It's actually an authority whose members are appointed not by the government but by the parliament, and not only the majority of the parliamentarians have the power to appoint these commissioners that work in those independent authorities, but also the minority has the power to appoint some commissioners. So since the composition of its members is mixed, and commissioners must be important judges, important intellectuals, important lecturers at university, I must say that this system works quite well. Consider that, for instance, Berlusconi is no more the political leading figures in Italy. So undoubtedly, when he first won the elections, he managed to exploit his advantage of being the owner, the publisher of Canale 5, Italia Uno, the most important private televisions in Italy. Okay, so undoubtedly, when he first won the election in 1994, our democracy was hit in the very core of its democratic system, because undoubtedly Berlusconi exploited the situation. But afterward, the checks and balances that we have in our regime and the fact that our democracy is a plural democracy helped to recover from this illness, to recover from this problem by establishing new proceedings that help us to prevent Berlusconi and other political leaders, who are also entrepreneurs in the media sector, to shape the political audience according to their specific interests.
So let me clarify what you have said, that even private media are under certain control from the side of the public. So,
yes.
That's an amazing news, in fact, because, just we do not have any prejudices, at least in our part of the world or in our understanding, if mass media belong to private individuals, then they can somehow influence the editorial politics of this or that media. But another question is whether independent media in Italy, or can independent media in Italy apply for the governmental sponsorship, for the money that can come from the government or from the parliament. So whether they have support besides, in fact, private investments.
Yes, the media can rely on public fundings. Actually, the public funding system is conceived in order to assure that the political systems allocate funds, but without helping or disadvantaging media groups according to their political views. The government is due to fund all the media from all the political values, being from the right or from the left. And this system is based on specific laws and specific parameters concerning the contracts that are made, the fact that journalists, for instance, are part of the Italian Journalists Association, that is to say that they are, as journalists, under the scrutiny of the Italian Journalists Association. Okay, so it's undoubtedly a bit complicated system, but democracy, as I told you, is not meant to be easy, it's meant to be fair. But there are many checks and balances and many mechanisms that assure that all the media can concur to get the money without being driven by public funding in order, for instance, I don't know, to please the leader of a political party, because they can get the money not because they please the political leader, but because they comply to some specific rules.
Alessio, you worked as an advisor to the mayor of Napoli. It's a very beautiful city with a great history. But when I was in January in this region, I think it's a little dirty. It's maybe a major city haven't enough power. I think. How does the local government function? What do you think?
Well, Naples is the, let's call it the capital of southern Italy, but Italy, it's very diverse. So we have Lombardy, the northern regions, which are between the richest areas of the world. And we have southern Italy, which is poor. So this implies, for instance, that obviously we have also different level of public services, because in the north there is money, there is a civic culture, everything works perfectly. In southern Italy, this doesn't happen. That's why, for instance, in southern Italy, we also face some specific criminal problems like our local mafias that are mainly associated to southern Italy. Obviously, local governments are a feature in order to govern diversity in Italy. But also here, there is a huge debate, a very huge and controversial debate going on in Italy. Because the fact that local governments can join their autonomy reflects the fact that sometimes they are influenced by the social milieu, they don't have enough resources, and this also explains the fact that services in Italy vary according to the region when you are. You have everything which is perfect in Tuscany, everything which is beautiful but completely odd and crazy in Naples. This is actually a bit debate. Because Italy used to be a centralist state. Okay, let's say that the epitome of the centralist state was France. Okay, everything was decided in Paris. When everything was decided in Rome, also a same amount of money was allocated to the southern regions. But this situation has changed because from the half of the 80s onwards, a new political party called the Northern League, which is the forefather of the current league, arose. And the Northern League, its main political agenda was putting into question Italy as a central country, because essentially Lombardy, Milan, Tuscany didn't want to pay taxes for the poor southern regions, because poorer southern regions were essentially fed by the national budget, because these regions are actually economically poor. From then onwards, autonomy, a different level of autonomy, has been implemented in Italy, and as a consequence, we have different services in the north and in southern Italy. I have my idea about this debate as an Italian. By the way, I live in Rome, but I was born in Naples, so I'm sympathetic with people from southern Italy, but I'm obviously accustomed to work throughout my country, and I also recognize some reasons of people of northern Italy that didn't expect their money to be wasted in southern Italy due to corruption, because corruption is more enrooted in southern Italy than in the north. But this is a very, very big debate that started when Italy got united in 1861, so I prefer not to annoy you with these very big questions. But it's undoubtedly an interesting story to be told.
Well, I think we are running out of time, just I don't know, Dmitry, if you do not have any more questions.
Yes,
well,
I
then
have one small
we can.
questions. I have small one
Okay.
question. What do people in Italy know about Belarus?
What we know about Belarus? Okay, I think that the average Italian knows that there are beautiful women. The more literate Italian know that Belarus, there is a regime which is sympathetic and close to Putin. And we know that you are probably not exploiting civil liberties as we do in Western Europe. So that's all.
Okay, well, thank you. On this positive note, I suppose that we can come to an end of our very interesting conversation. Really, Alessio, thank you very much for your presence with us and for your very interesting insight, because a lot of things that you have told us were kind of revelations, because just the things that look normal for the people living in the Western world sound very abnormal or strange or unfamiliar for the people living under autocratic rule, for the people of Belarus and for the people of Russia, for the people of many Central Asian states of the former Soviet Union. So at least we understand where to go. We understood also the challenges of democracy, but I think it was Churchill who said that democracy probably not the perfect way how to run the country, but nobody can come up with any other forms of governance that could be more effective than democracy. Okay, on this positive note, again, thank you very much. Have a great evening, and say hello to the beautiful country of Italy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure and honor to contribute to this broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good luck.
Ciao Belarus. Ciao Belarus.
Ciao. Ciao.